What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be working on this 2004 Honda Accord EX with the V6. That is a J30A4 motor if you're interested. Now that's from 2003 to 2005, and 2006 and 7 got the J30A5 motor. But it's pretty much going to be the same thing for this procedure because we are replacing the spark plugs. So let's pop the hood and get started. I never trust the hydraulic pistons, the old ones especially. They'll just let the hood fall right on your head, so I wouldn't trust them. All right, so before we start, I just want to mention the fact that the reason I'm replacing these spark plugs is because I don't know when they were last changed. And since it's been purchased and under my responsibility, this car has driven pretty much 90,000 miles, and the service manual recommends that you change them every 105,000 miles. So it's more than likely that these spark plugs are old and worn because it is a little rough at idle. It's not misfiring and it's not running poorly, but it's just a little bit rough at idle, which I don't like. So I'm going to fix it by replacing the spark plugs, and I'm pretty sure that's going to solve our problem. Also, one more thing I'd like to add is make sure the engine is cold. It doesn't have to be completely cold, but at least don't do it when the engine is hot, because the threads of the spark plugs that thread into the block are aluminum. They can be stripped easily, especially when the engine's hot. And also you can avoid burning yourself if the engine's not hot. So I would suggest doing this on a cold or almost cold engine like I am. All right, so now that the hood's up, we're going to start with a Phillips head screwdriver. Turn these until they stop. That will release this cover here, and that will expose the 3 coil packs that are at the front. All right, now you're going to grab your ratchet or whatever you want to use, but it's a 6mm Allen that holds these coils in, so just break those loose. I'm going to do one at a time, that way I know that I've completed one cylinder and I don't start a bunch of different jobs at once and potentially forget to complete one of the steps. So take this bolt out, put it here safe, press this little tab and pull up. That'll unclip the electrical connector and pull the coil right out. Inspect it, make sure it's not burnt or melted or anything like that. This one looks okay, so I'm gonna reuse them. I did not buy new ignition coils because these should last just fine. Car has 253,000 miles on it, and it still performs great. I don't see any damage on these. This is just a little bit of dirt. So let's continue to removing the spark plug. All right, now for the spark plug, you're going to want a special spark plug socket, which basically has either a magnet or a little rubber gasket in there that gets stuck to the spark plug so that it pulls it out when it's unthreaded. Just put your ratchet on there and break it loose. Once it's loose, you can do it by hand. You do not want to use electric or impact tools on this, especially not to put it back in, because it can crack the ceramic on the spark plug, and also you could potentially ruin the threads. So that's why I'm just going to go by hand, pull it out, and here is this cylinder right here. As you can see, it doesn't look too bad. These are iridium spark plugs that need to be replaced every 105,000 miles. Here's a picture of the owner's manual with the service schedules. And as you can see, 105,000 miles is the recommended interval. Now, these being iridium spark plugs, you don't gap them. You don't want to touch that electrode with a gapping tool because it can ruin the tip. So as you can see, the old one has a much bigger gap than the new one. Maybe you can't see, so I'm going to get a picture of it with my phone so that you can tell the difference. I'm filming on a GoPro right now, so I can't really come too close, otherwise it'll be all blurry. So when you pull the spark plug out, if you find oil on the threads or on this part right here, then that means your spark plug tube seals are leaking. So you're going to want to replace the valve cover gasket with the spark plug tube seals. In this case, it's not leaking, so just keep that in mind for any spark plug that you pretty much ever pull out. Also, you want to look for abnormal deposits on the electrodes on the tip of the spark plug. I'll throw in a picture of some examples that you want to watch for, just in case it's burning too much oil, too much fuel, not enough fuel. Maybe it's burning coolant, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe you're running cheap gas in it, or maybe it's healthy. So just keep an eye out on all that, and let's continue. Now that the old one's uninstalled and inspected, take the spark plug socket, put it in. Also, one last thing before we install this first spark plug is that you do not need to put anti-seize on the threads or anything like that. the coating of the spark plug should take care of the anti-seizing aspect. And start it by hand always. You don't want to potentially cross thread the threads, because then you're in for a big job. So start it by hand, bottom it out either by hand or with the ratchet. This one bottomed out completely by hand, but I'm just gonna snug it. There we go. And then of course we're gonna torque them to manufacturer's specs, which is 13 foot-pounds or 165 inch-pounds. I'm just gonna go for 13 foot-pounds because that's what it converts to. So if you're curious, these are the spark plugs that the car needs. I bought NGKs. I do not recommend anything other than NGKs for Japanese cars, and really for pretty much all cars. This is the NGK part number here. On the NGK website, you'll see them as this long number up here, and on other websites, you might see them as NGK 6994. So I'm going to link these down in the description from where I bought them, and well, that way you know. Here is a picture of the owner's manual and what it recommends for spark plugs. Obviously it recommends these right here, but depending on which model year you have, it could vary. Again, this is a 2004 with the J30A4 engine. Alright, so I got my torque wrench set to 13 foot-pounds, and I'm just going to go until it clicks. Basically what you want to do is, I'm going to show you on this old one, but the new one has a brand new crush washer that has to squeeze on there, and that's what you want to bottom out. Basically, you want to crush that crush washer. Oh, there it is right there. That's 13 foot-pounds, and that's when you want to stop. Now, if you don't have a torque wrench, NGK gives you some directions on the box as to how you can tighten them. So they say between 1/2 and 2/3 of a turn after it has bottomed out. So bottom it out with the ratchet, and then you go either 1/2 to 2/3 of a turn, depending on what feels right for your application. So that was nice of them to provide sort of an idea for people that may not have access to a torque wrench. Although I will link this one down in the description. This is a 3/8 torque wrench I bought from Harbor Freight, and it works great for stuff like this. Now, next step, what I like to do is I like to put a little silicone paste on the end of this ignition coil. That'll help with moisture. It'll help seal up the spark plug. And silicone paste does not insulate electricity, so it will not affect the spark whatsoever. So put that down in. Before you reconnect your connector, you want to take a look at it, make sure it's not melted or broken or anything. So this one's not. That's perfect. So we're going to reinstall that, reinstall the 6mm Allen head bolt, and snug that down. I'm sure there's a torque spec for this, but I mean, it's just holding on an ignition coil, so you just bottom it out, give it a little tweak, and it should be all set. It's bottomed out. I just gave it like not even 1/4 of a turn, and it feels super tight, so that's where I'm going to leave it. This cylinder's done. Let's do the same to these two, and then we'll move on to the back. So as I'm doing these two cylinders right here, I realized I didn't mention the spark plug gap. Even though you're not supposed to gap them, it should be on this particular engine 44 thousandths of an inch, so 0.044. If you feel like gently checking the spark plugs, you can, but I would not recommend it. I would definitely not recommend gapping them, because like I said, you could ruin the coating that's on the electrodes. All right, so now that we've got these three done, don't forget to put this cover back on. Line it up, make sure those little pins stay where they're supposed to be, and then to lock them in, just turn them clockwise with the flathead screwdriver until they lock. There we go. It's not very secure, but it's on there. Shows that the engine has extreme power. I'm just kidding. It does have a good amount of power though. All right, now let's move on to the rear plugs. Now for the rear spark plugs, it's actually easier and harder at the same time. It's easier because, well, there's no cover. It is harder because you are limited by the space that you have here between the engine and the firewall. But basically it's the same procedure as the front. I'm going to try and show you this first one right here, and then down the line, well, I mean, it's the same thing. You might just have to unhook this power steering hose right here, and that'll give you some more access Like I said, it's the same exact procedure as for the front, but I will try and show you at least one of these if I can get the GoPro down in there. There we go, I got the GoPro at a decent angle. It is the same procedure as the front, so I'm just gonna speed up the process, but at least I'll show you what I do to get around all these things. This bracket is just held on by a 10mm bolt, so I might just take that off to make life a little easier. I also switched to a less beefy 3/8 ratchet because things are a little, space is a little tighter back here. So again, this bracket just holds the power steering pressure line in place. And now that we have full view of what's going on here, it is a lot easier. And for these, I'm actually just going to do them all three at once. Just make sure to keep the ignition coils in the same order. That way, if there is any sort of difference in them, the computer and the engine already know that there is a little tiny difference in them. Obviously, if one is worn out, I would recommend to replace them all. But if they're all still fine, then just put them back where they came from and everything will be okay. All right, so now that we have everything done, as you've seen, the rear isn't that bad to do. Always do all 6 spark plugs, and if you're gonna change an ignition coil, change all 6 of them. Don't just do one, because then it can affect the way one cylinder fires. Not a good habit to do. So if you're gonna change one spark plug, obviously don't just change one spark plug, change them all. If you're gonna change one ignition coil, change them all. Having said that, let's fire it up and see how it runs. All right, so as we start it, we're gonna watch for a misfire or a check engine light. There shouldn't be any of that, but just in case. All right, this looks good to me. As you can see, the car has 253,000 miles on it, so it's seen a lot of miles and it definitely needed this little tune-up. It does seem to be running smoother. Let's go look at the engine and see if it's shaky at all. All right, so just feeling it, I don't feel any abnormal shakes anymore. It used to feel like a very slight misfire, although it wasn't a full misfire. It just felt like a worn out spark plug. Right now it's vibrating, but obviously it's running, so it's gonna vibrate, but it's not shaking, it's not vibrating abnormally or out of rhythm. That's what you want to look for. You want to look for an out of rhythm vibration, or like a miss in the vibration. I don't feel any of that. It's all smooth. Idles nicely. So I'm going to call this job done. I'm going to write down when I did it, at what mileage, and I'm going to replace them again at 105,000 miles. So having said that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.